The medieval winter was not just cold, it was relentless, unforgiving, and capable of shaping the very survival of communities. From frostbitten fingers to empty stomachs, the harshness of medieval winters tested every aspect of human resilience. At the heart of the problem was temperature itself. Medieval Europe, particularly during the period known as the Little Ice Age, roughly 14th to 19th centuries, experienced winters far colder than most modern generations have ever known. Rivers and lakes froze solid. Snow blanketed entire villages for weeks or even months, and icy winds swept across the countryside with brutal force. Without modern insulation, heating methods were primitive. Peasant homes were small, often built from wattle and daub with thatched roofs, and had only a single fireplace. The warmth rarely reached every corner of the dwelling. Castles and manors, though sturdier, had stone walls that absorbed cold and remained icy despite large hearths. Even the wealthiest struggled to maintain warmth, while peasants often relied on shared bedding and fur clothing to stave off frostbite. Food scarcity made medieval winter deadly. Summer and autumn harvests were all that people had to sustain them through the dark months, and bad weather could destroy entire crops. Root vegetables like turnips, cabbage, and carrots were stored in pits or cellars, but they could spoil, freeze, or become infested with vermin. Meat and fish had to be salted, smoked, or dried to survive the winter, and even then, supplies were limited. When stocks ran low, communities faced hunger or outright famine. Historical records describe winters where peasants were forced to eat tree bark, weeds, or even straw mixed with flour just to survive. Starvation weakens the population, making them vulnerable to disease and frost. For children and the elderly, the combination of hunger and cold was often fatal. Travel and communication became treacherous during winter. Roads turned into slippery tracks of ice and snow, making trade, pilgrimages, or movement nearly impossible. Frozen rivers could halt commerce, isolating villages from markets and leading to shortages of essential goods like salt, grain, and firewood. Travellers risked not only frostbite and hypothermia, but also attacks from wolves, bandits, or wild animals forced closer to human settlements in search of food. Those who attempted journeys during deep winter often relied on sleds or makeshift snowshoes, but accidents, starvation, and exposure were common. Entire armies could be immobilized by snow, and sieges that might have lasted weeks in summer stretched into months, with defenders and attackers alike suffering from cold and hunger. Disease compounded the cruelty of winter. Cold weather forced people to spend long hours in close, poorly ventilated quarters. The lack of hygiene, combined with malnutrition, made medieval populations extremely vulnerable to respiratory illnesses like pneumonia and influenza. Outbreaks of plague or other infectious diseases often worsened in winter because weakened bodies had less resistance. Monks and physicians had little more than herbal remedies, prayers, and bloodletting to offer. Frostbite and hypothermia were ever-present threats, particularly for those working outdoors, such as farmers, shepherds, and soldiers. Death from cold, either directly or indirectly, was a daily reality for many. Livestock, vital for food, labour, and survival, also suffered in winter. Frozen pastures meant that animals could not graze, forcing farmers to ration stored fodder. Starving cattle and horses weakened or died, leading to shortages of meat, milk, and labour for ploughing the fields. In some harsh winters, entire herds perished, creating long-term food crises and economic strain for villages and towns. This dependence on animals made winter survival even more precarious. If the livestock failed, so did human sustenance. Social structure and hierarchy affected how people endured winter. Nobles and the wealthy had access to better clothing, larger homes, and stored supplies, allowing them to survive with comparative comfort. Peasants, on the other hand, lived on the edge of subsistence. Their clothing was often thin, made of rough wool or linen, and many slept in the same bed as their children, and sometimes even livestock, to conserve warmth. Monasteries and churches sometimes offered shelter, food, and assistance, but these resources were limited, and large populations could overwhelm them. Survival often depended on communal cooperation, sharing of firewood, and careful rationing. Winter festivals like Yule or Christmas offered brief relief, but they were not a cure for the underlying hardships. These celebrations allowed communities to maintain morale and reinforce social bonds, which were crucial for enduring months of cold and scarcity. Food for festivals was often the last of the stored provisions, and extravagant feasts could deplete a village's winter reserves. Even religious fasting, practiced in some regions, added to the stress of survival during the hardest months. Psychological effects of medieval winter cannot be underestimated. Long nights, limited sunlight, and isolation from trade or communication created stress, depression, and anxiety. For peasants, each day involved a careful calculation, rationing food, tending to animals, and maintaining warmth. Every misstep, a spoiled food supply, a broken roof, or an illness, could have catastrophic consequences. The weight of responsibility was heavy, especially on those who oversaw families or entire households. Winter also shaped military campaigns and warfare. Armies attempting campaigns during the winter often faced more danger from weather than from enemy swords. Soldiers suffered from frostbite, snow blindness, and exhaustion. Supplies of food and fodder for horses were harder to maintain, and frozen terrain could both hinder and aid strategies, depending on the skill of the commanders. Historical accounts of campaigns, such as during the 100 Years' War, reveal entire units succumbing to cold and hunger rather than battle. In addition, environmental hazards made winter deadly. Snowstorms could isolate villages for days, prevent hunting or foraging, and increase the risk of avalanches in mountainous regions. Ice-covered rivers and lakes could collapse under weight, drowning travelers and animals. Flooding from melting snow in early spring destroyed homes and fields, compounding the misery. Villagers relied on observation, folklore, and simple tools to predict weather. But these methods were far from reliable, and sudden storms often caught people unprepared. Finally, the brutality of medieval winter was a combination of factors: nature, technology, society, and biology. Without modern infrastructure, insulation, heating, or medical care, humans were at the mercy of the elements. Communities survived through resilience, ingenuity, and cooperation, but the cost was high. Those who endured severe winters were hardened by experience, and each cold season left an imprint on culture, traditions, and folklore. Stories of famine, frozen rivers, and deadly blizzards are reminders that medieval winter was more than an inconvenience. It was a test of human survival. Medieval winter was brutal not just because of the cold, but because it struck at the heart of survival: food, warmth, health, and mobility. Its challenges shaped medieval society, dictated human behaviour, and forged traditions that endured for centuries. To live through a medieval winter required constant vigilance, careful planning, and a little bit of luck. It was a season that demanded respect, and for those unprepared, it could be merciless. In every snow-covered village, frozen castle, and icy battlefield, the cold left its mark on bodies, on communities, and on history itself.